we're about to ship macOS 10. And I'd like to show you something using the GeForce 3 and OpenGL running on Mac OS 10. And it's not a normal something. It's something by one of the legends in 3D computer graphics and gaming, John Carmack from id Software. And John today, welcome John.
As John Carmack stood on stage and showed off the technology that would drive Doom 3, he did it very specifically on the NVIDIA GeForce 3, which was debuting here to release shortly after this very conference in Tokyo in 2001. The GeForce 3 was the first DirectX 8.0 compatible GPU. It had 64 megabytes of DDR video memory, and importantly, 4 pixel shaders and 1 vertex shader. Those aforementioned shading units would be the enablers of pioneering technologies to enable new types of shading in video games. Now, what did id show off here exactly on the GeForce 3? Here there's perhaps no better person to describe it than John Carmack himself.
Alright, what I've got here is a demonstration of our new in-development gaming engine, and this shows off some of the things that we can do with the power of the GeForce 3 in here. And all of this is actual real game code. There's no real special tricks going on here. Everything is being done real time. So the big trick that we're getting now is the final unification of lighting and shadowing across all surfaces in a game. Because games have had to do these hacks and tricks for years now, where we do different things for characters and different things for environments and different things for lights that move versus lights that are static. And now we're able to do all of that the same way for everything. We're able to go ahead and apply all of these on every single pixel rather than every vertex or even every object like we used to do.
As John says, Doom 3's tech would unify lighting and shadowing, and importantly, do it all in real time, which was an absolute rarity at this debut point in 2001. See, in older id Tech games, or like in many other game engines of the time, dynamic moving objects like characters or weapon pickups were lit entirely different than the environment, giving them this look like they're floating or superimposed over the environment, which is statically lit. id Tech 4 or Doom 3 would scrap all of that and light each object in real time in a per pixel way thanks to bump mapping. As we can see on these character models here in Doom 3, bump mapping made it so each pixel on the character texture is uniquely shaded, which dramatically enhances lighting detail and realism. Bump maps also add on the dimension of specular lighting, so we can see the sharp or dull highlights of local lights showing up on object surfaces. This specular dimension to lighting makes it so Doom 3 can more accurately portray metallic or shiny objects. With bump mapping and per pixel lighting on every object in Doom 3 essentially, it looked generationally different than what had come before. And the bow tie on this new shading model, powered by the first tech developed for the GeForce 3, were stencil shadow volumes. Doom 3 has incredible real-time shadowing from arbitrary light sources. Objects can move and the shadows parallax correctly with them, and lights can also move themselves, causing a cascading dance of all the shadows in the environment. And as mentioned, the way Doom 3 did this was with a technique called stencil shadow volumes. Generally with this technique, a camera from the perspective of a light is rendered and rays are traced to the vertices of the geometric objects in the scene. The technique's name comes into play with the 2D stencil buffer generated from this, which looks like it's traced lines on the geometry's edge. The negative space in the 3D scene beyond this vertex silhouette is extruded into a volume mesh that covers the scene from the primary view. With this, any bit of geometry that lies within the volume behind the occluding object are not lit by the light source in question, and the shadow is additively blended onto the scene. The end image is one with extremely precise, down to the pixel shadows, and they are only limited in their accuracy by the amount of geometry on the silhouette of the casting object. This technique can render shadows to a level of accuracy that we are only now returning to again with ray tracing in the modern era. With these new shading and shadowing techniques, Doom pushed a world fully lit and shadowed in real time where objects were all treated equally in rendering, lending the visuals a solidity and flawlessness and unity that is unparalleled at this time. And the gameplay of the game leaned into it, with you having a flashlight to light everything up and find things in the environment. Yes, there are some issues with the tech, like how there is no bounce lighting in the game, so everything is pitch black in the shadow, and of course the shadows cannot represent soft shadows, but still, playing the game more than 2 decades later in its original incarnation, I am floored by its graphical quality in spite of the vintage. The question is, was Doom 3 as hardware hungry as its predecessors? Did you need a PC from the future to run it at full frame rate? Here we can answer the question well by just going back to that GeForce 3. Released in 2001, a little more than 3 years before Doom 3's eventual release, the game's technology did debut on that GPU and was demonstrated on it by John Carmack on stage. Surely it should be able to run the game fine, right? Well, loading up the game at the high settings at 800 by 600 might shock you somewhat. At these settings, using the game's specific GeForce 3 rendering path, the game's frame rate dances anywhere between 10 and 60 FPS depending upon what is going on. The most important visuals are there, the stencil shadows and per pixel shading with specularity, but it is running oh so poorly. This was the highest end GPU just released 3 years earlier, and it is frankly unplayable at a modest resolution without any anti-aliasing. To put it into context, 800 by 600 is like the 1080p of today, and nothing fancy. It's exactly 1/4 the resolution of the highest common resolution of that time, which was 1600 by 1200, much like how 1080p stands next to 4K today. And some further context to this performance here. The GeForce 3 can play the previous id Tech game, Quake 3, with 2 times MSAA hitting 60 FPS at 1024 by 768, which is kind of like the 1440p of our time period. This GPU, which launched at $499 USD or $900 USD in today's money, was not playing this game well. How could this happen if they showed the game running off on this GPU in the first place? Well, that original demo was small, non-complex environments, and the game has a lot more geometry and many more lights. And more lights affecting each pixel for each piece of geometry means more shading passes. This is why the game has such a roller coaster-like performance on the GeForce 3. It can do pixel shading, but in a limited capacity, and the areas that require more pixel shading and have more geometry will tank the frame rate due to the inherent complexity of it. So what recourse did a person have back then to run this game on older kit like this to increase performance? Well, you could drop resolution to 640 by 480, which was basically the 720p of the time period. Doing that doubled performance when it's at its worst, but this doesn't really change the roller coaster nature of the performance since it is pixel shading limited. The game is still often below 30 FPS even at 640 by 480. Truly, on a GPU like this, the most stable frame rate was achieved by turning off all the effects which made Doom 3, with no bump mapping, specularity, or shadow volumes at the lowest settings at 480p, the frame rate can be consistently above 30 FPS. But it doesn't exactly look good. So what type of GPU did it require to get Doom 3 running the way it was meant to be played? Benchmarking the generations of GPUs at the game's high settings at 800 by 600 shows that only when you get up to 6 series of GPUs does the game hit an incredibly consistent 60 FPS at this resolution. The 4 series is hammered almost as much as the 3 series, in spite of running more than 50% faster at times. And the 5 or FX series is doing well enough, but it still can often dip below 60 FPS in the more complex views of this cutscene here, which is representative of some of the heavier areas in the game. So as I see it, you would need the highest end 5 series GPU like I'm showing here, or a mid to upper range 6 series GPU to get Doom running well by modern standards, that is 60 FPS. In the case of a 6800 GT I have here clocked up to 6800 Ultra levels, it can actually play the game with near flawless 60 FPS at 1024 by 768 with 2x MSAA, which is kind of like a modern heavy game at 1440p in comparison with all the bells and whistles turned up. Even with one of the highest end GPUs like this one at Doom's release, you still technically were not getting the game's highest graphical quality without compromises, as GPUs at release only had a maximum of 256 megabytes of VRAM, and to fit in that amount and lower, Doom 3 shipped with varying levels of texture compression depending upon the GPU's available memory. That's why the comparison I showed off between the GPU generations earlier showcased such variable texture quality. The GeForce 3 with its 64 megabytes of VRAM has worse quality textures than the 128 megabyte GeForce 4 Ti 4800, and that has worse texture quality than the 256 megabyte 6800 GT. The 6800 GT here is not even using the game's highest texture quality, even though it has the highest end VRAM configuration by release date. Uncompressed textures that were actually the ultra quality textures in Doom 3 required at least 512 megabytes of VRAM, and no GPU had that. So only GPUs of the future, like we're seeing here on the right, could play Doom 3 with uncompromised fidelity. In Nvidia's case for its reference cards, only the 7900 GTX from nearly 2 years later in 2006 could actually play Doom 3 with these uncompressed textures. So Doom 3 was heavy and forward-looking, and it crushed the GPU it was originally showed off on in 2001. Still, it has more graceful scaling to lower-end components than Doom 1 did in 1993. Yes, there were big compromises necessary with resolution, but you could technically load up the game on lower-end GPUs to get playable performance. Doom 1, by comparison, was a slideshow on anything but the most recent ultra-expensive PC in '93, and even then, it's not great by modern standards there. Conversely, in 2004, Doom 3 actually ran wonderfully at launch on the GeForce 6 series, as performance shows, while using the headlining features there at high resolutions even with anti-aliasing. Thankfully for the low end, time passes and now Doom 3 is a lot easier to run, where it even runs on something like the original Switch, which only consumes less than 10 watts in its handheld mode. There it targets 60 FPS at 720p. Sure, it drops from that target, but it just goes to show how something which caused giant PC towers to sweat now runs on battery-powered devices.